Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm very excited to be a part of this virtual summit and the launch of this email platform, Everest. Summits and Everest are both near and dear to me. And today I hope to take you out of your room, take you on some journeys, and ultimately inspire you and show you that we can climb out of adversity. These are trying times today. And I've learned a lot in the mountains, and hopefully a lot of the messages and ideas that I bring to you might help you to succeed through adversity. I've been now climbing for over 40 years, and people often ask me the question of how I could do something like this for so long, something that's not easy. It's not always fun. You're never comfortable. And truth be told, I like climbing simply because it is hard. It's based on my personality. I like the involvement. You know, when you go on an expedition to one of these mountains over 8,000 meters, which is over 26,000 feet, you spend literally 3 months climbing one mountain. But prior to that, there's an immense amount of time and energy and investment and preparation that goes into getting ready to do one of these climbs, the logistics, putting the team together, organizing the equipment, buying the permits, doing the physical training. And all of that is what I call doing my homework, because when I arrive on that particular mountain, then that's where I take my test. And as you get higher, when you get closer to the goal that you've been striving for, it actually gets harder as you get closer to the summit. It gets colder, the air gets thinner. And it's as if the mountain is trying to conspire to prevent you from succeeding. And because of that, you need to be patient and persistent and resilient. And you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. There's a lot of risk involved, as you can imagine. And I'm sure you've read a lot about mountaineering tragedies and accidents. And there are elements of risk, and I break it down into two different segments. There's the objective danger, the avalanches and the storms, the things that we can't control, that we have to accept. But in my opinion, the majority of risk in the mountains is based on decision-making and the choices and the subjective part of what you do and how you do it. And you can imagine there's a lot of ambitious people out there climbing mountains, a huge investment of money, tremendous expectation to succeed, and many of these people are willing to summit at all costs. And you have to learn how to temper your ambition and how to pull back when you need to, and listen to the mountain is something that I'm very adamant about. I love climbing, but ultimately I like being alive a lot more, and learning how to be patient and temper that ambition is something that I think has kept me alive. 10 years ago or so, somebody suggested that I write about my stories and my ideas and what I learned and the lessons. And so we put this book together. And to me, the overriding key was to create a title that conveyed those messages in a few words. And for me, the idea of no shortcuts to the top was paramount. You know, we in the mountain world, we earn our summits day by day, step by step, breath by breath. And after achieving a goal, you want to look back on what you created and how you treated people and the journey you took to get there. And that's ultimately the story that I wanted to convey. The book is done rather well, although a lot of people said I would have sold way more books had I titled it Shortcuts to the Top. It was, in fact, a book that inspired me to go on my journey and to start climbing. I read this book titled Annapurna in 1975. I was in high school, and I was growing up at the time in what we know as the great mountaineering state of Illinois. But this book inspired me. It was the story of a group of 8 climbers from France that went to this mountain called Annapurna in the Himalaya. And Annapurna is one of only 14 peaks in the world over 8,000 meters. And at the time, not even Everest had been climbed. This was 1950. And this group of 8 climbers literally stepped off the map. They spent 3 months together battling on this mountain together as a team. And in the end, they put 2 of their climbers on the summit. And that's how the logistics of these expeditions work. You work as a team, and ultimately you know that maybe only 1 or 2 of you will plant the flag on the summit. And that's something that you sign up for. And after reading that story, it flipped a switch. And I thought that, for me, is something that I want to do. Eventually, in my life, I wanted to climb Annapurna, or I wanted to climb Everest. And obviously I couldn't do that overnight. There was a lot of things I had to learn, experiences to gain, steps I had to take. The first step I knew I had to take was, to get the hell out of Illinois. So I left Illinois right out of high school, and I moved myself to Seattle, Washington, and mostly because of the terrain. 2 hours from downtown, you can be climbing amazing mountains. It has a great history of creating strong Himalayan climbers, and that's what drew me to the Pacific Northwest. And the mountain that I focused a lot of my attention on was Mount Rainier. This is our iconic peak in the Northwest. It's 14,400 feet high. And I felt that this, for me, would be that perfect classroom. It had all those elements of a high altitude mountain that I wanted to experience. 14,000 feet of altitude, terrible weather, steep terrain. And this is where I started, and this is where I began to gain the experience that I needed. This was my stepping stone. And after a few years of climbing on my own, I applied for and I got a job to work as a guide on Mount Rainier, and this was in 1982. And I worked there for 10 seasons, and I made 215 ascents of Mount Rainier. And I took hundreds and hundreds of customers to the summit of Mount Rainier. And I learned a lot of lessons. And the primary goal for us as guides is safety. And we learned that if we rope together with each other as a team of 4 or 5 people, we're stronger and we're safer. And I was also surrounded by senior guides that have 15 more years experience than me, and they became my teachers and my mentors. And when you have customers that come to you to lead them to the summit of these mountains, you can imagine there's a lot of expectation. They spend time, energy, they've bought new gear from REI. They come and they want to climb to the summit of this mountain. And that's our job as guides, is to help them do that. But our primary goal is to keep them alive. And second to that is to provide a good customer experience. That's similar to what you try to do with your email platform. They walk away and they say, I had a great experience with that particular company. Ultimately, we try to get to the summit of these mountains with our customers, but we, in essence, don't get to decide whether we've paid a lot of money, whether we've trained hard, whether we have shiny new gear from REI. Ultimately, it's the mountain that decides what we get to do and what we don't get to do. And I call that listening to the mountain. You take in all that information that the environment is providing, and you make your choices and your decisions based on that. And listening to the mountain was probably the key lesson that I took away as a guide, and it's kept me alive ever since. I started to dream and think that possibly I could, maybe someday, try to climb Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth, 29,000 feet high, only a third the amount of oxygen that there is at sea level on the summit. Everest was first climbed in 1953, a British expedition. 40 people worked together for 3 months on that mountain so that 2 of the team could reach the summit, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. So there's that teamwork, again, that helps you to achieve a goal. Second to that was the use of supplemental oxygen. That gives you strength and energy at 29,000 feet. And I truly believe that since Hillary and Norgay used oxygen for the very first ascent of Everest, it kind of became the standard of how you climb these high altitude mountains. You want to get to the summit. You don't really care how you get there, and oxygen helps you to achieve the goal. But in essence, what it is doing is reducing the altitude of the mountain by about 6,000 or 7,000 feet. So it's pulling it to your capabilities. I personally decided before going to Everest that it was more important to me how I climbed Everest rather than just if. And to me, that meant not using oxygen. I felt the use of oxygen was a bit of a contrived way of gaining success. And I really wanted to test myself to see if I could climb to 29,000 feet without oxygen. I knew it'd be harder, I would suffer more, and ultimately I felt the experience would be greater. And so that was a hard, fast rule that I set for myself. 10 years into my career, I was invited to go on my first Himalayan expedition, and that was to go to Mount Everest. And when you go to these Himalayan mountains, they're halfway around the world: Nepal, Pakistan, Tibet. Everest is in Nepal. You fly into Kathmandu, you drive to the end of the road, and then to get to the base of the mountain, you then walk for 2 weeks, bringing all of your supplies with you during that process. And eventually you arrive at the base camp of Mount Everest. And this is at just under 18,000 feet. So most people assume once you get to base camp, you rest for a while, and the next day you go for the summit. It takes a lot longer than that. In fact, we're going to be on this particular mountain now for 3 months, 8 of us working together as a team. And to do the work, we have to actually build 4 camps stationed above base camp, each within a day's climb away, so that eventually 8 to 10 weeks later, we can climb through those set camps, and on the 5th day, we go for the summit. So the bulk of the expedition and time is taken by us as a team, working together day by day, carrying loads of equipment to these various camps. And for the initial part of the climb, for the first 10 days of the climb, all we do is go back and forth, over and back, up and down, just to Camp 1, to supply that camp with tents, sleeping bags, rope, food, fuel, oxygen. Once Camp 1 is supplied, we then start carrying loads to Camp 2. We repeat the process to Camp 3. We're going up and down, back and forth, literally like ants on an anthill. And it is a very logistical process. It's a supply chain of stuff that we're sending up in a very timely and organized fashion to these camps. 8 weeks later, if it all goes well, we finally then establish Camp 4 at 27,000 feet. This is our highest and final camp. And as you approach these altitudes now, imagine the amount of work that still has to be done. But with the lack of oxygen, the amount of work that you can do actually goes down, and the loads that you can carry decrease to the point where Camp 1 ends up being one little tent with just enough supplies then for 2 people to occupy on their way to the summit. So 8 weeks have gone by. We've done all the work that we've needed to do. We're acclimatized. We've built enough red blood cells now to function at altitude. But now it's time to pick the 2 people that are going to represent the team to go to the summit. We come down to base camp, we regroup, we have a meeting. The leader looks around the room and says, okay, who wants to go to the summit? Nobody raises their hand, because you know what? All the motivation that you had in the bar 6 months ago is gone. So how do you pick those 2 people that are going to now go for the summit based on their motivation, based on their strength, and also based on who has contributed during the initial part of the expedition? I was one of the 2 people selected now to climb to the summit with a partner to represent that effort. So we leave base camp. We climb for the first 4 days. We arrive at Camp 4. We spend the night. And at 1 o'clock the next morning, this is the 5th day of that final push, we begin the final ascent to the summit. And we start literally in the dark, knowing that it's going to take 12 hours from here to reach the summit. And that early start allows us not only to get to the summit, but also to descend before dark. It's going to be an 18-hour round trip. And at these altitudes, you're so far removed now from any sort of safety or rescue. Literally every step that you take and every decision you make has a consequence. And rather than thinking in the moment continuously, we think about our consequences in the future. 10 hours into that day, we reached a summit altitude of 28,700 feet. We're now 300 vertical feet away from the top of the world. We could see the summit, but the weather was rapidly deteriorating. We could tell that things were going to get worse over the next 2 hours if we chose to go to the summit. And based on the risk, my partner and I decided that there was no way we could go to the summit and also survive the descent. And it was at that point, 200, 300 feet from the summit of Everest, we decided to stop and to turn around. And that was literally then the end of the expedition. And imagine making that decision. You're 2 hours away from the top of the world. You've spent months of preparation, a lot of money, a lot of expectation, a lot of pressure to succeed. And this is where a lot of people keep going and climb to the summit. And that's what causes their demise, trying to come down in the event of terrible weather. We listened to the mountain. And I don't call that a failure. We did all we could. It was a situation that was beyond our control. The risk was too great. We had to stop and we had to turn around, and we walked away. And you know what? I knew that mountain was going to be there for a long time. And I knew I would probably have the opportunity to go back and try to climb Everest again. And in fact, I did. And in fact, it was not until my third expedition to Everest that I finally had another opportunity to try to climb to the summit. Once again, I left Camp 4, 27,000 feet. And on this particular summit push, I was alone. It was just the way the logistics of that climb worked out. And that was fine with me. I could do the technical aspects of the climb, but the hard part was trying to do this by myself, to set a pace, to kick the steps in the snow, to keep myself motivated. And for 12 hours without oxygen, knowing that for every step that I took, I would breathe 15 times. Imagine doing that for 12 hours. And during that day, you're kind of, first of all, wondering, why am I doing this? Why do I like this? And how do I decide to keep going rather than quitting? Quitting's easy, right? You can stop the pain. You can go down and say, it was too hard. But I kept pushing and I kept motivated and I kept breathing. And eventually, 12 hours into that day, I found myself on the summit of Everest, all by myself. And one of the hardest days of my life, but one of the most rewarding days of my life as well, to be on the summit of the world all by yourself. Pretty cool. But not so cool. I thought, who's going to take my picture? I need something for the office wall. So I have an ice axe with me and I stick it in the ground vertically, balance my camera on top of that. And this is how I took my own selfie then on the summit of Everest. And then you take in this spectacular view. You're literally looking down on every other mountain on Earth. And at that moment, I was the highest person on the planet. I thought to myself, memorize this view. You're not coming up here again, right? You climb Everest once and you go down. You're not going to come back here. Little did I know I would eventually climb Everest 6 more times in my career. And I think I have a legitimate excuse for going up the second time. I left my wallet up there, so I had to go back. So what do you do after Everest? For a lot of climbers, that's the pinnacle of a mountaineering career. For me and other climbers, we look at these other 8,000 meter peaks as even more challenging than Everest. They're not quite as high, but technically they test us in different ways. And I always wanted to elevate myself and take what I've learned and experienced and push myself to a new level. So after Everest, I went to this mountain called Kanchenjunga, just 800 feet lower than Everest. It's the third highest peak in the world, technically more challenging. This is a 3,000-foot sheet of ice that we had to climb even before thinking of going to the summit. But eventually, 2.5 months into this climb, 3 of us reached the summit of this amazing mountain. And here we are at 28,000 feet on this little island in the sky. And on a good day, if it's early enough and the weather's nice, we can stay on the top for about an hour. If the day is late and the weather's bad, 2 or 3 minutes, and we turn around and go down. But this was a beautiful day. We got an amazing view. This is looking 80 miles off to the west. And there, just left of center, you can see Mount Everest on the horizon. People think that when you climb to the summit and you get there, that's when you celebrate, right? You've achieved your goal. Why not? I've always felt that when I'm on the summit, it's way too premature to celebrate because, in fact, I've only done half of what I've set out to do. I've done the first half, but I've always felt that the second half of a climb, the descent, is ultimately more important. Getting to the summit is optional. Getting down is mandatory. It has to be a round trip. And a lot of people lose sight of that. They use all of their energy and resources just to get to the top. And they really don't have a plan for going down. And most accidents and deaths, in fact, occur on the way down. So you have to plan for the round trip and budget for it as well. So what next? In 1992, after having climbed Everest and Kanchenjunga, I felt ready to really test myself on this particular mountain called K2. second highest mountain in the world, 700 feet lower than Everest, and in many ways, the hardest mountain on Earth to climb. Technically challenging, unpredictable weather. We call it the Holy Grail. And in 92, I felt ready to try. I went with a partner and a friend of mine. This is Scott Fisher, also from Seattle. And we had done our homework. When we got to K2, we'd read about what it could do to you, how steep it was, how many issues there would be, rescues that might be needed, bad weather situations, how long and how hard it was going to be. This is something that we expected, and this is in fact something that happened that year. But during that first 2 months of battle on K2, the majority of our team gave up and went home. And the overriding reasons were that it was too hard and it was taking too long. And for me, I didn't quite get it because I knew ultimately that's what K2 was all about. Eventually, Scott and I managed to set up our fourth and highest camp. This is at 26,000 feet. This is our little envelope of nylon, which weighs 5 pounds, and to make our tents lighter, we make them smaller, literally the size of a single bed. And we park ourselves there for the night, hoping that the next day we can climb that final 2,200 feet to the summit. The hardest day by far is ahead of us. So that night, I mean, you're thinking about tomorrow. You're anxious, you're worried, you're nervous, you're excited. You know, will I be strong enough tomorrow? Did I train hard enough 3 months ago? Will the weather allow us to go? And so we just want to get up and go. We woke up the next morning to this. A storm had come in. 3 feet of snow had fallen and was still falling. Conditions were much too dangerous for us to even consider going to the summit that day. What should we do? We thought about going down and escaping to safety. And we thought, yeah, we can do that. But if it took us that long and that hard to get to here, if we go down today, we'll never make it back up to here. So we decided to wait. My partner and I in this little tent for 3 days, we stayed there together. And this is where you really, really have to like who you're with, because there's nothing to do up there. And you think you're just resting and relaxing and eating. In fact, you're actually slowly withering away because of the altitude. But luckily, 3 days later, that window of weather cleared, the opportunity came, and we were then allowed to climb to the summit of K2. And that final ascent took us 10 hours. And finally there we stood on the summit of K2, one of the most challenging peaks of my life. And I look back on that ascent and the duration and the challenges and the difficulties. And I looked at myself and I thought, I have what it takes to climb the highest peak in the world. The persistence, the patience, the planning, the preparation, and more importantly, knowing how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And so my resume now looked like this. I had climbed the 3 highest mountains on Earth, and it had been rather random. And I wanted to continue to climb more of these 8,000 meter peaks. I really enjoyed it. I loved it. I embraced it. I was good at it. And I made the decision then and there to go out and try to climb all 14 of these remaining 8,000 meter peaks. I figured I'd done 3. There's only 11 left. And so I called my project Endeavor 8000. And I really didn't know how long it would take. Would it take 10 more years? Would it take 15 years? It didn't matter to me. It would take as long as it would take. And this is this journey that I would go on, Endeavor 8000. The next part of it I had to do was to figure out the teams of people that I would do these climbs with. And I thought it was going to be kind of hard to keep 8 or 10 people together for the next 10 years. Why not find one partner that's doing exactly what I'm doing in exactly the same way? And there's a lot of criteria when you look for a partner like that. And I found this guy, Veka Gustafsson, in 1995. We met. And more importantly than anything, you have to like each other, because if you don't like each other at sea level, you will not like each other at 26,000 feet. And the other criteria is that we have to trust each other with our skills, implicit trust. We are roped together in this dangerous arena, and we need to trust each other every single step of the way. And Veka then became my number one go-to partner for the next 10 years. We had great success, and ultimately as well, I'm more proud of this than anything, great safety record. For every 3 expeditions we went on, everything went right. Nothing went wrong. And safe and sound, we'd reach the summit, and safe and sound, we'd make our way back down. Never got frostbite, never had an accident, never had a rescue, and more importantly, never lost a climbing partner, which in my world is extremely rare. And I'm very proud about that. But on a third of these climbs, we go halfway around the world. This is another one of these mountains in Pakistan. This is called Broad Peak. We spend 2 months climbing this thing. And on our final push to the summit, we were then stopped just 100 vertical feet away from the summit based on dangerous snow conditions. And still, there and then, we stopped and we turned around and we walked away, knowing that the risk was too great. I'm now very well into my career. And as you can imagine, and I saw this with a lot of other climbers in my world, the amount of pressure to succeed was growing. You have the media following you. You've got a fan base. You've got sponsors with expectations. Your expectations increase as well. And being in this world of risk, you have a tendency to perhaps be comfortable with that risk. And also there's a tendency to slightly become complacent as well. We're already on that fine line between safety and danger. And throughout your whole career, you follow the rules that you learned as a younger climber. And it's that one day you decide to maybe step over that edge, to take a shortcut, to break your rule for the sake of success, to save time, to save money. And I had to learn how to put blinders on and to prevent any outside source of influence to change how I was doing what I was doing or how I thought about what I was doing. And that was a very hard thing to do. And I saw a lot of people in my peer group that broke their rules for the sake of success. And sadly, a lot of them never returned home. I remembered my foundations of why and how I started climbing, and I was doing it for me and not doing it for anybody else. And so with those rules in place and those thoughts in place and the determination and the partnership, I kept plugging along year after year, climb after climb, amazing journeys, beautiful mountains, wonderful experiences. And then 17 years into this project, I looked at my list and I discovered I had done 13 of these 14 mountains. I only had one mountain left on the list. And lo and behold, that final mountain, Annapurna. Remember that mountain that I read about as a kid? This was now the last peak of the 14. People often think that I left Annapurna for the end. In fact, I hadn't. I'd already tried Annapurna twice earlier in my career. But this is known as the most dangerous of these 8,000 meter peaks based on the avalanche activity that occurs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There's no safe way to control the objective danger of Annapurna. And of 180 people that had only climbed it, 60 people had died trying. I knew the risks. And on my first 2 attempts of Annapurna, simply saw the activity of danger. And with my partner, Veka, we left on both of those previous expeditions. I started to think now, was climbing Peak 14, Annapurna, worth the risk? And at the moment, I thought it wasn't. I thought, first of all, don't die on Annapurna, because that's not going to look good on the resume. And I felt it just wasn't worth it. And I almost put it aside, being content with 13 out of the 14. But the more I thought about it, I thought, I can't make the decision safe and warm at home. I need to go back to Annapurna and sit at the bottom of that mountain, and it will tell me what to do. If conditions were just as bad, I'd go home once again. But I wouldn't know if conditions might possibly be better unless I went there and looked at the mountain. So I made the decision to go back with my partner for the 3rd attempt. At that point in my life, I'd been married for 10 years. I had 2 kids at home, so I had a lot of other things to think about. But believe it or not, my wife supported my decision to go. She knew how I trained. She knew the decisions that I made, and she full on supported me going back. She never once said no or doubted me. And to have somebody like that at home that supports you, that believes you, that cheerleads you, that lightens your load and that helps you to succeed. So my partner Vake and I, we go back to Annapurna. This is now our 3rd attempt on this mountain. This is the spring of 2005. We park ourselves at the bottom of this thing and we watch it and we listen to it. And it was an amazing season that year. It was colder. The mountain was glued together. There was little avalanche activity. And there and then we made the decision that we felt it was safe enough that season to climb for the summit. We were at the right place at the right time, and we took advantage of that opportunity. At this point, we'd been climbing together for 10 years. We were a well-oiled team. We trusted each other. We believed in each other. We helped each other. We motivated each other. And together on May 12th, we took those final steps. And then together, we sat on the summit of Annapurna. For me, this was my ultimate dream come true. This journey that I had taken, this kid in Illinois that read a book, that made a plan, that went on this journey, that had this 18-year project that I completed for myself. And to stay motivated during those years, to keep going, to keep it funded, and more importantly, to survive it and to finally achieve that goal. It was one of the highlights of my life, to having successfully sat on the summit of Annapurna, my 14th 8,000 meter peak. So why was Annapurna at the end? Again, I didn't plan for it to be at the end, but I'm glad it was, because I think I truly needed 30 years of experience to not only succeed on Annapurna, but to survive it. So it came the right time in my career. And I think you'll find that as well. In your career, you'll have a goal or an obstacle or a challenge, and you'll be ready for it. You might not have been ready for it 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but you'll know when you're ready for that next big challenge. And also poetically, this book that I read as a kid that put me on this journey to climbing Annapurna, I'll never forget that process. So my life had now come full circle. I'll leave you now with the last sentence of this amazing book. Pictured on the summit here on the cover is the leader of the climb and the author, Maurice Herzog. And the last sentence of this book, he says, "We all have our own Annapurna." And I think that's a great metaphor for life or for business. The horizon of your career is a series of challenges, a series of mountains. There's valleys in between, right? There's issues that occur. There's obstacles along the way. But every time you reach a summit and a goal and achieve that goal, you want to elevate yourself, to grow and expand, to increase your business, to do something new and innovate. And you know it's a bumpy road to success. Some years you're doing amazing. Some years there's an obstacle in your path, such as this year, where you felt like you're not going anywhere. If anything, you're going backward. But it is a bumpy, long road to success. And the way we climb mountains is we don't overwhelm ourselves with the immensity. We do it a day at a time, a step at a time, and a breath at a time. And that's what you focus on in the moment. Obviously, you surround yourself with partners and coworkers and teammates. They help you. You unify. You help each other synergistically. Your family, your friends, they help you as well. So there's partnership. There's patience, persistence, planning, perseverance. I think the key to any success in life and in business is passion. If you love what you do, you will be great at what you do. You won't mind how long it is. You won't mind how hard it is, and because it's the journey and the process that you embrace. And I think with those tools in place and with those ideas in place, we can climb to summits. We can elevate ourselves together. And you as well can climb to the top of your own Annapurna. Thank you very much.